together. And I'm so happy that we could come together today to share with you two of our fabulous trainers, Bridget and Andrea. I know are going to introduce themselves later, but they have really been our staff leads spearheading a program at Education Minnesota called Degrees Not Debt. And that's a program that we've had in place for quite some time, realizing the impact, the financial impact on student loan debt, and it has on our members and their families, and why we need accessible higher education for everyone. And we're very lucky that both of our national unions, the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, have been supporting these efforts and leading at the national level. And we couldn't be more proud of the work and the money that we have been saving our members over time. So appreciate the chance to be here and hope that this is beneficial and helpful to all of you. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over to the good stuff here. And that's probably what you've been waiting for. And that's Bridget and Andrea.
Thank you, President Specht. Yes, everyone really loves to start their Friday morning talking about crushing student loan debt. But the good news is we'll talk about crushing student loan debt and how we can work together to hopefully provide you with what information we have and help with loan forgiveness. So I am delighted to be here. Actually, weirdly, I love talking about this because I'm so excited that we are in a position now where lots and lots of folks are getting their loans forgiven. We're seeing widespread discharge of debt that people have, that has been a difficult challenge in the best case scenario for many people and a life-changing burden for too many. So we're going to talk today. My colleague Bridget and I are going to talk about what we know about all of the sort of current events in loan forgiveness. And we're going to do our best to answer as many questions as possible in our hour and a half together. So Bridget, if you want to, we have a slightly awkward presentation style insofar as Bridget is going to move slides, but we will welcome your questions sort of throughout. So let's just, we have a slide that just is our, the next slide just notes that we are recording this session, and you have received, there's a lot of people will take photos of the slides, but you should have received them in an email from Jonathan earlier, maybe 10 minutes ago. And so you're welcome to refer back to those after the session, because we do provide a lot of information fairly quickly, and a lot of it is technical, as many of you know, when you have been navigating these fairly inaccessible programs probably for a long time. So as we get started this morning, what we'll do, I think our objectives are the next slide, ma'am. So we'll just introduce ourselves kind of very briefly. We're going to do a quick chat about the context around student loan debt. We want to spend a few minutes sharing with you the announcement that was made in August from the president about the student debt resolution and debt relief that will be now available very broadly to folks. And we're going to dig in around public service loan forgiveness and the waiver provisions that are currently in place. And we want to talk a little bit about why you can trust that those waivers are working. As Bridget is currently noting in the chat, we will answer questions while one of us is presenting. One of us will answer questions in the chat, and we will try to be as specific as we can to your specific question. We will also try to provide as much information that supports the what questions are coming up and the information in the slide in the chat. So if you are in this live and are able to check out the chat, please do that. So that's what we'll do for the next hour and a half. And I think we'll roll. So next slide is who are we? So Bridget, you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Bridget Moore. I use she, her pronouns. I'm actually an organizer with Education Minnesota, but get to do this as my extra side job, I suppose. But while not helping folks navigate all of the difficult and arduous process around student loan forgiveness and things like that. I do love to do things like travel and go to vineyards in the Willamette Valley. As I noted, I'm an organizer, so I help with local capacity, new local organizing, things like that, and have been at Education Minnesota for 15 years now. So excited to be with you here today, hoping that we can get your questions answered and you feel equipped for next steps moving forward around the various loan forgiveness options that are out there.
And I'm Andrea Ciccone. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am technically a negotiations and research specialist at Education Minnesota, which means I work on all things to support our locals in collective bargaining. And in the my policy portfolio is work around school finance. In addition to Bridget and I working on this loan forgiveness support for members, probably for about the last 8 years now. Bridget and I both have been at Education Minnesota for 15 years. We are like wily veterans now, so we know lots of strange things. And when I'm not a flat face on your screen talking to you about your loans, this is my family. My kids are in Minneapolis public schools, and you can often find me hiking, biking, and frequently anxiety baking, as I often am right now, as I worry about how are we going to get everybody's paperwork processed for public service loan forgiveness in the next month. So, you know, like worry and apple cake, it's great. We are going to start off by just doing a quick contextual look at this. And I think that this is probably information all of you have as folks who are educators and who are dealing with your own students in your own classes who are taking on student debt to invest in their own education. So we provide a little bit of initial information to make it very clear to people this is a crisis not of personal responsibility, but in fact in a system that is not working for many, many people. Our next slide is about 2 years old at this point. We don't have post-pandemic or coming out of pandemic data about the level of student debt, but we do know from new information about who will benefit from the debt relief announced this summer that we are certainly over 1 million borrowers in the state of Minnesota carrying student loan debt. We know that the number of borrowers has increased. We know that the amount of debt that we are all carrying has increased. Minnesota is what we call like a high education, lots and lots of folks with a lot of education, and a high debt state. I think in the past we have ranked about 5th in the nation when it comes to our individual average student loan debt. And you could run the state budget on the amount of outstanding debt that all of us have. One thing that I think is really critical to point out, this is a generational problem. This is something that students who are coming into higher education now deal with in a very specific way, but it's also something that people deal with in every level of their career, including into retirement. And in fact, the fastest growing group of folks who carry student loan debt are seniors. We see more and more people who are financing the education of their children and their grandchildren. And that is not about, again, this is not a system of personal responsibility. This is ultimately about what it takes to provide higher education in the way that we're providing it. And we know, of course, all of you who work in a higher education setting know that that doesn't necessarily mean that those investments are going to the faculty who work in those settings, right? Like we are not necessarily seeing the price of higher education translate into sustainable family supporting jobs for our higher education faculty. And that's not right. And it's a system that needs broader change than just student debt relief. I also think it's really important that we point out and name that this is not a burden that we all bear equally. So this data is an important way to look at like how much are we all carrying when it comes to student loan debt over time, and how is this repayment, how are all the repayment processes working for people? And you can see that we have this snapshot of data from our partners at the Student Borrower Protection Center. And they look at, they look across census categories, and then they look at gender on a binary, so male, female. And they're looking to see after 12 years after somebody starts college, what is the student loan debt burden that those folks are carrying. And you can see pretty clearly that when it comes to who still has debt, that burden is very often it's a more difficult burden for people who identify as female, and certainly for BIPOC folks. And I think it's really notable that when it comes to our Black and African American students and borrowers, they owe more 12 years after beginning college than they did when they took out their initial loans. And that is about systemic problems with employment. That's about repayment practices and lender practices. And so when we talk about student loan debt, we have to also center the fact that this affects people differently, and that we need to make sure that a solution to this larger scale problem around who can afford college, who has access, and who is able to get their loans paid off, that we name the fact that we have to do a better job at providing equity in that process. That's a really important value that we hold as we talk about solutions around this problem. So the context is meant to share, we're all in this kind of together. We all have a lot of challenge around this, and that we're working in a broken system, but we are seeing some advances. So we want to start out by talking, kind of digging in a little bit about what was just announced in August by the president. And that was really the fulfillment of a campaign promise that we've been waiting and waiting. And then we feel pretty good about the legal grounding of this announcement. So we're going to share what we know at this point, make sure you have some resources. So what was announced on the next slide is that we will very shortly see an application launched by the Federal Student Aid, which is a department, which is a subsidiary or a department within the Federal Department of Education. And what that announcement told us was, in that application, anybody who has had a Pell Grant at any point will be eligible for $20,000 in loan relief, independent of the job that you do, independent of the status of your loans. You are going to be eligible for $20,000 in loan relief, and all other borrowers should be eligible for $10,000 in loan relief. That relief will be subject to income limitations. So making sure to be very clear, folks who can expect this relief will need to show income on their 2020 or 2021 tax filings. For individuals, less than $125,000, and for households, less than $250,000. Those income limitations are important to note. And we, again, are every day looking to see if that application is going to be launched. If you go to the if you go to the federal aid website, so studentaid.gov, you can actually sign up for information to get a notification when the application on this broad debt relief is announced. And we're sharing this here in the context of this presentation because you can do this. You are eligible for this broad debt cancellation and public service loan forgiveness. So this does not this doesn't prohibit anybody from accessing, again, this sort of broad announcement from this summer and then continuing down the process of public service loan forgiveness. And it can be helpful to have some of your balance taken off because it can lower your payments down the road when it comes to interest, et cetera. So we encourage everybody to look into this. We'll provide a little bit more detail on this on the next couple of slides. So Bridget, if you want to go to the next one, what I think is important for a lot of people to know is, what kind of debt do I need to have in order to qualify? Because there are so many rules about public service loan forgiveness, we're going to make kind of a broad piece of advice here. This announcement applies to federal loans that are owned by the Department of Education, and those tend to mean direct loans. But for the purposes of this program, the federal government is making sure to be very clear about their definition to say that includes direct loans. It includes Parent Plus and Plus graduate loans, which have been very difficult to deal with, as many of you probably know, through public service loan forgiveness. And it includes some FFEL loans, FFELP loans, Family Federal Education Loan Program loans. Now, the way to know, are my loans eligible, is if your loans have been placed into a pause during COVID. In other words, back to March 13th of 2020, if your loans have been on pause and no payment has been required and no interest has been accruing during that time, your loans are already eligible for this debt relief. However, you can still, right now, today, and actually through December, consolidate your debt. If you consolidate FFEL loans, or loans that have not been in pause, commercial loans that are not currently owned by the Department of Education, you can still qualify for this debt relief. We think it's really important actually to say, at this point, there is actually just no reason not to consolidate your commercial loans. If you have an FFEL loan that has been bank owned and serviced by Navient or Nelnet or now Mohila or any non federally held loan, like now is the time to consolidate, because again, it will put you in a position where you can qualify both for this program of debt relief announced by the president and for public service loan forgiveness. So I want to say that as clearly as I can. Commercially held FFEL loans that have not been in pause during this COVID forbearance period, please do go and consolidate them as quickly as you can. Moving to the next slide, I think this is a good place to just say, like, by the way, consolidation is happening fairly quickly, at least on the borrower side. If you go to the Department of Education's student aid website, so studentaid.gov, you can go to, they actually, of course, as soon as we screenshot these, they changed the format of the website, but if you go into manage your loans, you can launch a consolidation application that will very quickly, I think, put you in a position to fill that out and submit. It will automatically submit. And then that consolidation process, while the paperwork takes some time, if you do that today, you can be done in the course of 15 minutes, and then your loans will be in the shape that they need to be in for this debt relief and also for public service loan forgiveness. So we just want to be clear, you can do that, and you have no need to wait, and it's not going to harm your possibilities for loan forgiveness under this program or in public service loan forgiveness. And then, finally, I would just want to make sure to say, we know there are a lot of questions about this. We have gotten approximately 7 4,000,000 questions since this launched in August. And what we want to just tell you about is, like, what do we have in terms of resources? We really like this website. It's called forgivemystudentdebt.org, and there's an FAQ that is quite good that they're updating kind of all the time. It's run by the Student Borrower Protection Center in concert with a bunch of different national unions, including 2 of our affiliates. We think it's very reputable because they are working every day with FSA on the actual minutia of this program. And so we know that they are going to provide current and helpful information when it comes to this specific debt relief. We also think that they're doing a pretty good job on the student aid website. If you go to studentaid.gov/debt relief announcement, what you will see there is more up-to-date information. And in fact, it's better today than it was when I looked at it last week. So those are very reputable sources of information. What we are finding based on the questions that are coming to us is that Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, etc., not great places to get reputable and reliable information about these programs. We're getting a lot of people who are hearing things, or very often reporters are making statements that are not accurate. So we would just really encourage you to look at the most reputable sources of information, and we really think these are 2 good ones. So that is I think, most important things to cover. And I know Bridget has been handling questions in the chat. Bridget, are there specific questions that came up that you want to highlight before we move on?
I think the tax implication piece is something we want to talk about for the cancellation.
Oh, really good question. Okay. So one thing that we like to really clarify, people often worry when it comes to the amount of loan cancellation or discharge that they receive. Am I going to be taxed on this? So I want to differentiate right now. Anything we talk about with public service loan forgiveness is not and never has been taxable income when it comes to the amount you have discharged. Interest, principal, it's not taxable income. The law is very clear about that. Our tax code is clear about that. At this point, when it comes to this $10,000 or $20,000 loan relief that the president announced this summer, that discharge under our current tax code could be taxable under state taxes. We have to pass what's called a tax conformity bill in order for people who receive that $10,000 or $20,000 to not have to pay taxes on that amount. We have our public affairs department and our lobby team have reached out. There are a number of interested legislators, and I think that Representative Aisha Gomez, who is on the tax committee, has already begun to draft that bill of tax conformity to pass early in the legislative session, so that anybody who has received this relief will not have an additional tax burden on their state taxes. At the federal level, we know it's not going to be taxable. On the state level, that really is still a concern that we need to rectify. And I would say to all of you, as we approach this next election, I think we're 38 days out, this is going to matter an awful lot to a lot of people. And it is a very good question to ask if you're thinking about and talking to people about who they're voting for, who is in support of a tax conformity bill. That's a question that we are encouraging our own members to ask when they're looking at candidates, particularly in the Senate, where we have traditionally had a lot of difficulty passing legislation, even on common sense provisions like this. I think the other question that comes up a lot around this debt relief is, aren't we going to just see this get tied up in the courts? And I don't have a magic crystal ball to say no. We know that there's a lot of potential interest on the part of, for example, GOP governors. They're actively saying, well, we don't want to, this debt relief is not fair to people who didn't have student loans or who already paid them off. And what I would say is, in reaching out to our national partners, particularly at the AFT, who have been working kind of very closely with the Department of Education about this, they have a very strong legal backing around this debt relief. And they feel that there's actually that Congress has already invested in the Department of Education the authority to provide this debt relief. That was stated pretty clearly, actually, by the administration when they announced it. So that doesn't mean there won't be a legal challenge. It does mean that we will have to pay careful attention, and any lawsuits that do come up, we will be making sure to provide as much information as possible about what the implications are for this. So I think stay tuned, but do also apply when the application is launched. And as Bridget's about to talk about, please do also make sure that you submit a public service loan forgiveness certification form. Even if you think, gosh, I've been through this before, do it anyway before October 31st, because we want everybody to have some level of insurance that if we get tied up in the courts, which I'm not sure we're going to do, but if we do get tied up in the courts, then everybody's done what they need to do to access public service loan forgiveness during this waiver period as well. So those are some really critical points that we know from working again with our national partners. This is what we know at this point, and we should know more in the coming weeks. So I think I'm going to pause and turn it back to Bridget for our next section, and I will take the chat.
And I'll just add one more piece on the court system side of things. And I mentioned this in the chat. There was just yesterday in Indiana, a judge threw out a case in which they were trying to delay or pause kind of the cancellation piece of this. So it's already attempting to go through the courts. As Andrea stated several times, the administration feels strongly about their standing and ability to do this. So nothing is ever 100% known, but feeling really, really good and strongly about the legitimacy and able to execute this cancellation. Okay, so as we kind of mentioned at the beginning, there's a lot going on with kind of student loans right now and your ability to access kind of different programs and waivers and things like that. So I just want to be clear, for public service loan forgiveness, we're going to start with some of the regular requirements that have been in place since 2007 and highlight the major changes that have started since October 6th of last year and are in place until the end of October this year, right? So the final date for this waiver is on Halloween. And this is in addition to or supplements the kind of cancellation. So you can access both the cancellation that was just announced and public service loan forgiveness. I'll just say, we are coming up on a timeline here, so it is really, really, really important if you're going to access public service loan forgiveness to get that application in before October 31st. So, the design or the idea behind public service loan forgiveness was really to incentivize folks to go into and stay in public service for a while. So essentially the idea behind the program is, you make 120 payments on your student loans, and at the end of those 10 years, all of your remaining balance can be forgiven, which is a great idea in theory. But where we really got hung up, and a lot of folks did, is that there were these, eligibility requirements that were not made clear to borrowers. So here are kind of the 4 standard requirements that, again, have been in place for the last 15 years. And we'll dig into each one of these a little bit more. So you have to make 120 payments on or after October 1st, 2007. That's when the program started. You have to have direct loans, which is why we talk about a lot where you can find information on your loans and the types of loans that you have. You had to be enrolled in a certain type of repayment plan called an income-driven plan, and you had to work full-time at a qualifying employer. So those are kind of the four regular eligibility requirements. I'll just say, you know, we have seen a ton of forgiveness in the last year. Before that time, for the first 7 years, we probably only saw between 5 and 10 people actually successfully do this. The rejection rate was somewhere between 97 and 99% of all applicants were rejected because, again, these criteria were not made clear to borrowers. So the first one here is 120 payments. And essentially what this says is that you can't make multiple payments in a month. The shortest amount of time it's ever going to take you to get to that 120 payments is 10 years. One payment per month, and you'll get to the 120 payments. You can't make three payments in a month and be down to 117. You also couldn't prepay on your loans. So again, multiple made payments in one month wouldn't make it go any faster. The important thing though here too, I think, is that they don't have to be consecutive. So it could take you 12 or 15 years to get to those 120 payments. If you went back to school, if there was a deferment or a forbearance, it wouldn't make you start over. It would just take you longer to get to the 120 payments. You have to be working for a qualifying employer. So there's no, partial forgiveness. You can't get 80% of your loans forgiven if you've worked in public service for 8 years. You'd have to go back and work in public service in some sort of way. It doesn't have to be at the same employer. It doesn't have to be, for the same job, but it does have to be in public service in some way. And the payments may be retroactive. I think it is key now more than ever. So you don't have to enroll from day one, right? You could enroll 7 years into your 120 payments and get retroactive credit for your first 7 years of payments. And then the final piece here was something we saw pop up particularly a lot in the previous administration, that they were saying, even if you made a payment and you made a payment for $10 more than what it was required, they weren't counting those payments toward the 120. So we just wanted to be really clear to folks that pay the exact amount that you're required, nothing more. The second piece here is that you had to have federal direct loans. That's why we really harp on people to say, go to your studentaid.gov account, log in, see the type of loans you have, because this was a big reason that so many people were rejected. A lot of folks had those what's called federal family education loans or FFEL loans, and those loans as they stand are not eligible for public service loan forgiveness. Now that's one thing that is like temporarily changed in the waiver, but regardless, you still need to consolidate your loans into a direct consolidation loan in order for them to be eligible for public service loan forgiveness. So up until this waiver period, if you had FFEL loans and you made payments for 10 years, none of those payments would have counted toward public service loan forgiveness. You'd have to consolidate and start over again, which was obviously a massive barrier for a lot of folks. I think the other thing to note here is the Parent Plus loans. These are just notoriously like tricky and hard, because Parent Plus loans as they stand don't qualify on their own. Again, you would need to consolidate them into a direct consolidation loan, but for them the limits are even harder because of the type of repayment plan you have to be on. It's often a very unaffordable amount because you have to be on an income contingent repayment plan. So again, that's why we strongly encourage that consolidation that Andrea talked about earlier, because regardless if you want to access public service loan forgiveness or the cancellation, we do need folks to have those direct consolidation loans. All right, the third piece is up until, again, this waiver period, you had to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan. And this is the other big reason we saw that massive rejection rate of the 97 to 99% is because, again, folks weren't told that you had to be on an income-driven plan in order for any of your payments to count. So income-driven repayment plan is really an umbrella term that covers several different types of repayment plans. But the idea behind them is that they are based on your income income and not on your loan balance. So they're all based on a portion of your discretionary income. And right now that the discretionary income limit is incredibly low, right? So they're basically saying any amount of money that you make over 150% of the federal poverty line, which is a low standard, is your discretionary income. And that's how they determine what your payment amount is each month. And so again, once payments restart in January, if you are not yet at those 120 payments needed for public service loan forgiveness, you will need to go and to be on an income-driven repayment plan going forward. But again, this was one part of the waiver that now, up until October 31st, any payment on any type of repayment plan would count. But again, moving forward, you do need to be on those income-driven repayment plans, and you do have to verify your employment every single year in order to continue to be eligible. And I'm actually going to go back one more time on this one, because I think the other piece on income-driven repayment plans has to do with how you file your taxes. So for income-driven repayment plans, if you are married and file your taxes together, as most people do, they are going to count your household income when determining your payment each month. If you are married and you file your taxes separately, they will only count your individual income when determining your payment each month. I'm not an accountant. I am not a tax expert. I know that there are a ton of benefits to filing your taxes together, right, jointly. But I just do want to flag that as something to be aware of when thinking about income-driven repayment plans. And then the fourth and final piece is that you do have to be working full-time at a qualifying employer. And Minnesota State is a qualifying employer, so that box is checked. The other piece of it is that you have to average 30 hours a week, 8 months out of the year. So again, they're trying not to penalize those who work in education or higher education. That's why you have the average of 30 hours a week, 8 months out of the year. Things like summer breaks or other contractually allowed leaves still count as being employed full time. So if you're on military, FMLA, other leaves that are guaranteed within your contract, that still counts as full-time employment. If you are continuing to make payments, those will still count as working full-time. And now we know that particularly in higher education, those hours calculations can get really tricky. So we're going to try to address that on the next slide. And anyone else, Andrea, I know that you've worked on this a ton along with me. We can kind of navigate this together. But full-time versus part-time, particularly again in higher ed, is a challenge. So the definition that Minnesota State is using, and a big shout out to the MSCF, because they have put a ton of work into trying to navigate this and work with MnState to really figure this out, because obviously adjunct, or if you're working at multiple campuses, that can get really tricky and confusing. So the part-time definition is 0.75 across the whole year, which really comes out to 0.375 per semester. You can work at multiple campuses. You can work in like different jobs if you're not at that 0.375 per semester. And one of the things we have done successfully is, if you are one of those folks who work at multiple campuses during the same semester, the same year, there's a contact person at MnState who is going to be really helpful in helping kind of track all of those hours, all of that FTE status to try to get your employment certified. And I'll just say, there's gonna be some diligence required on your part in some of these things, because it might have to go semester by semester and really figuring out how to get to that FTE status. Andrea, is there anything you want to add? I know that you've done a little more on this than I have.
Yeah, I'll just clarify a little bit. And, just please all understand, like, our work on this has been through our affiliate MSCF. And so I assume all of this is still true for folks who are working at other campuses than the ones that we've been directly dealing with. But I'll just point out a couple of things we've learned along the way. One is not every HR department has, this either consistent or clear rules around employment certification. So if you are a person who has worked full-time at one campus and then, full-time at a different institution within the Min-State system, what they are asking people to do is even though your employment has always been through the system, right? It's always been through Min-State. You still have to have your employment certified by the individual college, institution, or campus. So if you were a person who was at Mankato for 5 years and then you moved up here and are now teaching in the Metro, you may still have to go to HR at Mankato and say, could you please certify my employment for the time that I worked there, and then go to your current employer. We have asked and advocated to try to get a more centralized system for that, and we sort of haven't gotten there. If you are a person who has worked across multiple campuses, and we see this a lot when it comes to people who are working, for example, adjunct positions, but also remote assignments. So if you are part-time at one institution and part-time at another, those two institutions aren't necessarily going to be able to certify your employment at that full-time level. If that's you, you are welcome to reach out to Vice Chancellor Eric Davis at the system office, and he can help with the employment certification. I would encourage you to just ask those questions about the best way to get this certified to your human resources department where you work currently, where you have the bulk of your work, but just know that that can be a little hinky. As we are approaching this timeline, if you are feeling like you're not getting a response, I would reach out to the system office directly to just say, look, I need to get this form in. Please let me know what I need to do in order to meet this deadline. And I think they are very committed to doing it. So those are my adventures with human resources in a fairly large bureaucracy to date. Back to you, Bridget.
Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to answer the question in the chat.
Sorry, yep.
No worries. Okay, so that's the piece on higher ed and kind of trying to calculate the full-time status. We know it's not straightforward or simple, but want to know that there is a path forward. Okay, so now we kind of want to speak to the waiver, gave an overview of the standard kind of public service loan forgiveness requirements, but really want to spend a little bit of time explaining what is currently waived, like what pieces of public service loan forgiveness are like, we're going to set those aside so we can get a lot more payments counted and we can get more folks, we can get more loans forgiven for people. So there's a lot of bullet points here, but I think it is important to kind of go through each ones. You'll see the normal public service loan forgiveness requirements on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side is what's in place again through October 31st of this year. So we've got 1 month left. So first bullet, you can receive credit for periods of repayment on any type of federal loans. So direct loans, FFEL loans, or Perkins loans. So even if those loans are not currently consolidated, but you have been making payments on them for a long period of time, you can get payment credit on those loans. You will have to consolidate those FFEL and Perkins loans, but you will also get retroactive credit on those loans, on those payments. Periods of payment on any type of repayment plan count. So, we talked about those income-driven plans. Right now, if you were on a graduated, an extended graduated, a standard, whatever type of repayment plan, those payments will now count toward public service loan forgiveness. This includes, periods of repayment before you consolidated your loans. So let's say you were making payments in 2007 on FFEL loans and maybe on one direct loan. And in 2014, you consolidated those all together. They're now going to give you retroactive credit back to 2007, not just starting from 2014 going forward. Periods of repayment where payments were late or less than the amount due also count. So if you could only make $150 payment and your total payment was $250, you're still going to get credit on that partial payment. You're going to get credit if the payment was late, right? So those things were not in place before. Periods of payments on loans before consolidation count, again, even if paid late or less than the amount due. Another piece that isn't actually in here is if you were in forbearance for an extended period of time. So if you were in forbearance for 12 months or more at any given time, or for a total of 36 months throughout your repayment periods, they're going to go back and retroactively credit you those payments. And the reason for this is because we know a lot of loan servicers were putting people on forbearance rather than letting them know about income-driven repayment plans. I'll note that the last 2.5 years for the government issued forbearance don't count toward that total of 36 months. However, and I know this gets really confusing and it's really much in the weeds, and I'm going to try to do my best to clarify it. However, the last 2.5 years that have been the government issued forbearance, those months all count toward the 120. So if you had, 90 eligible payments up until March of 2020, and you haven't made any payments for the last 2.5 years, you're still going to have an additional, wow, math, 36 payments. No, that's not right. 30 payments, 30 payments toward the 120. So, those pieces are really important to note. The other thing that I'll say is if you did have direct loans and you were making payments for the last 2.5 years, we are going to recommend that you call and ask for a refund on those payments, because you're going to get credit toward the 120 regardless. So you can get a refund on payments that you've made since October 13th, 2020, if you have direct loans. The other piece is that you can get forgiveness even if you're not employed, by a qualifying employer at the time of application of forgiveness. So I've worked with several people who are retired from education, and they said, but I worked, full-time in education for 30 years. I just retired last year. Do I qualify for this? Yes, absolutely. If you can retroactively get your employment certified, if you could do those things, then you absolutely qualify for public service loan forgiveness. So these are important things to note. The next slide, and I appreciate Andrea reinforcing some of this in the chat, because I think it's one thing to hear it one time. It's another thing to see it written down. And it's quite another to have me not fumble through the words themselves. So again, reinforcing some of the really big things where we have seen folks get the forgiveness because of these pieces. Periods of repayment under any repayment plan at all. Like any repayment plan, right? Again, graduated, extended, graduated, standard, all of those repayment plans count. Periods of payment before the consolidation. So any payments that you have made on or after October 1st of 2007 will count toward your 120 payments. Periods of payment where the payments were late or for less than the amount due count. And then the last one here is huge, right? So you can get payment credit on consolidated loans dating back to your oldest loans in repayment. So what this means is if I had loans in 2009 that I started paying on, and then I went back to school in 2015 and took out more loans. If I consolidate my 2015 loans with my 2009 loans, I am going to get credit for all the payments made since 2009 on both sets of loans. This is right. So for some people, they will have to make fewer than 120 payments on a loan in order to get them forgiven. So again, we want you to check out your loans. If they're not, if you have loans from 2019 and 2007, we're going to say consolidate those together, because you're going to get the credit for the loans that were taken out in 2007 on both sets of loans. And we want you to do it like last week. So do that as soon as possible, right? Because again, deadlines. Okay, so what doesn't the waiver cover? It doesn't you still have to be working in public service, right? We're not extending this to private sector employees. So again, 501c3, not-for-profit, and other not-for-profit organizations. I will say, as faculty members, it's important, like if you worked at a private college, right, that can count toward the 120, because a lot of those are 501c3 nonprofits. So a lot of times working in education or higher education, your employment history is going to count because you meet one of those qualifications of 501c3 or other non-for-profits. And then you also have to meet that full-time requirement. Again, the average of 30 hours a week, 8 months out of the year, the FTE equivalent 0.75 for the year. Okay, just in case you haven't heard us say it 17 times, here's 2 more times we're gonna say it. Get credit for any payments made on non-direct loans like FFEL or Perkins loans. You will have to consolidate your loans. Andrea showed you how to kind of do that on the studentaid.gov website a few minutes ago. Go there. And then you can get credit on any type of repayment plans. Is this actually gonna like work? Oh, no, it didn't. Okay, never mind. It's okay. So, you know, your first step that we're going to say all of the time, no matter what, is access your loan data on studentaid.gov. You can go into that, and under your name, you can see My Aid and a summary of all that. You can see what kind of loans you have, when they originated, how much you have to pay, who holds them, your repayment history. All of the information is there. Oh. This is what it looks like that I was just explaining on the previous slide. So after you log in, you can go to My Aid, and then you'll see a My Aid summary. So you can see some of that information in terms of what kind of loans you have. If they are not direct, you do want to consolidate your loans. So we're going to kind of break this down into groups so folks are clear about kind of what your next steps are, right? If you don't have only direct loans, one more time, we're going to consolidate those FFEL loans and Perkins loans into a direct consolidation loan by October 31st of this year. I'll note that if you do this now, the consolidation likely won't be complete by October 31st. The important thing is that you have initiated these things before the deadline. So you've initiated that consolidation. If you sent in the public service loan forgiveness paperwork before that time. So you're going to consolidate those loans. You're going to contact current and previous employers to fill out the public service loan forgiveness form and verify your employment history. This may require some like real diligence on your part, because again, we've got about a month left, and if you have multiple previous employers, you're going to have to call, email. I mean, harass may be a step too far, but you might have to show up to previous employers, right? And say, I need you to do this, and it needs to be done before October 31st. You know, we're working really hard with our national unions and other advocacy groups to try to get these things extended, but there are no guarantees. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to like take the beautiful weekend that it's going to be and figure out how to like get these things filled out. Step 3, after the and this is actually going to change. I'm going to change the advice a little bit on here, is while the consolidation is processing, get those signatures, and again, submit that application to MOHELA, your public service loan forgiveness application to MOHELA before October 31st. And then the 4th thing you're going to do is wait. And I know a lot of the questions that have come in is like, I haven't heard anything from MOHELA. How do I verify that they have my information? And like, these are complaints and concerns we've heard across the board. It is not just you. You are not alone in this. If you have received any confirmation from them that they have received or are processing your loan, that is good. Like, save that documentation, take a screenshot, whatever you need to do to feel okay about this. It's unlikely that calling them and being on a 2-hour wait is gonna be helpful, right? If there's any way for you to, or even just show that you sent in your PSLF application, send it certified mail or fax it, right? Have some sort of way that you have proof that you have done this. Because the step 4 is going to be wait. And that's what hundreds of thousands of people are doing right now, is just waiting to hear something. If you have direct loans, but you haven't submitted any paperwork, we're going to want you to submit a public service loan forgiveness application like as soon as possible. And you can do that on studentaid.gov/PSLF, or there's a PDF application that we can send to you as well. The second step you're going to do, wait, right? And I know, like, the waiting is counterintuitive for everybody who works in education and higher education. It's hard for us too. We want to take action steps. We want to be doing something else. But because, again, just the backlog of so many people trying to access these programs and coming up on the deadline, waiting is, your patience is going to be tried and tested. If you already have direct loans, you've already certified your employment, you're just going to have to wait. Again, the only recommendation I have is to find any sort of verification that you've heard from MOHELA that your your paperwork is processing, or you have verification that you sent it in, because it really is just a waiting game at this point. Here's how you consolidate. Again, we kind of showed you before. The studentaid.gov/PSLF will not only bring you to the public service loan forgiveness help tool that will help you generate the public service loan forgiveness application, but if you have to consolidate your loans, you will be prompted to do so there too. Okay. So that was a lot of information. I'm trying to think if there's, I inevitably missed something, right? And I know Andrea has been answering questions like Matt in the chat. So if there's anything else that you think we should address more broadly, Andrea, feel free to take that away right now.
I think just in terms of reinforcing a couple of points on the consolidation advice, so many folks who work in higher education have an undergraduate degree and then have gone back to do grad work, and then potentially for, a PhD, some other doctorate. So we can't necessarily say, yes, for sure you should consolidate, except there isn't a risk if you consolidate right now. Even if you bundle your loans together and are not able to backdate your payments as far as you would like, backdating your payments through consolidation doesn't harm your ability to get forgiveness on two different timelines anyway. So for the most part, what I just want to reinforce from what Bridget said is, if you took out undergraduate loans and started paying them, and then took out graduate loans at any point, even on 3 different timelines, it is very likely a good idea for you to consolidate, because we are seeing a lot of people who have 3 different timelines of repayment on their loans, who are well past the point where they would qualify based on 120 payments on their earliest loans, but still have 5 years to go. And because they're consolidating, they're able to get their debt forgiven 5 years earlier than they ever hoped. So we really think that's worth looking into. On some of our later slides, we are going to link to an FAQ that where the Department of Education just confirms that advice. So that's, I think, really critical. I just want to also reinforce Bridget's point. Consolidations are taking a minute right now because everyone is doing them. So you hit send on the consolidation on the Department of Ed's student aid website, and then get all of your certification forms submitted. How the help tool on the Department of Ed's website works, they will let you log into your own studentaid.gov account, enter periods of employment with however many employers you have. And by the way, when we've been working with adjuncts, sometimes it's like 20 different periods of employment, semester by semester. It's a pain in the neck, and it is still helpful to do. That help tool will generate a page of the application for each employer. So if you're a person who worked at so University of Rhode Island, my graduate school alma mater, and the University of Minnesota, and now you work at Metro State, 3 different institutions. By using the help tool, you will get an employer certification page for each of those employer certifications, as long as you enter the dates of employment and you have the employer ID number. That's the tax number. That's the number on your W-2 form. So just to be really clear about some of the very specific pieces of this, I think it's important. Okay. So what we'll do here is kind of draw this to an end, and then we'll take as many specific questions as we can following the recording. We'll stop the recording and then we'll try to answer your specific questions. A lot of folks have asked us, like, why should I trust this process? Well, you heard your president, Jenna, say earlier, my loans were discharged under this, 14 years of payments, consolidated during the waiver period, and my loans are gone. The reason we feel so good about this is because AFT, American Federation of Teachers, which is, one of our 2 national affiliates, they sued Betsy DeVos about all of the problems in this public service loan forgiveness process. And then they won the lawsuit. The Department of Education settled with them. And these are some, headlines from when that happened. And that settlement, that court settlement, provided a number of remedies. The remedies include this waiver period. So the Department of Education is obligated under a court settlement to make sure that it effectively processes all of these applications and uses these waiver rules to apply to all of these applications that come in during this period. And we think that that's important because, again, we're telling you on the paperwork side, get the consolidation in if you need to, and just get the PSLF form signed and submitted before the 31st. And even if it's not processed, even if you're hanging out there in this awful waiting period that is driving us all bonkers, we trust that this will continue to happen because the Department of Education agreed to do it in this lawsuit. And this is one of the remedies. So that is why I feel good about being able to advise people about this, but I know it's been stressful. I think I probably just said everything on the next slide just now. So Bridget, sorry, I'm like, yep, okay, yep, remedies, they're all listed here. You can look at them on the slides we sent out. But again, I also think a really big piece I had put in the chat earlier that, if there's issues that you're coming up against that are about an individual servicer, please do file a complaint, because they have to, under the remedies of this lawsuit, they had to generate an appeals process. And most of that is running through the Office of the Ombudsperson or the Office of the Ombudsman at Federal Student Aid. And we have a very sort of responsive ombudsperson at this point. So please do trust that is working. So that piece is important for us to say out loud. Why should you trust this? Because this lawsuit has been in place. And then on the next slide, do we go to resources? I forget. We've done this presentation about 80,000 times in the past couple of months. So my recognition of slides is not great. So again, I put these slides in place largely to make sure that as you walk away with the slide deck, they're here for you. Again, I mentioned the help tool that is available. It's pretty great in terms of dealing with the multiple employers, multiple periods of time. They have updated the help tool to do a better job with the rules that are in place right now under the waiver. I will say, if you're in the middle of a consolidation and you try to complete this help tool, it's not going to let you. It's going to be like, I don't think this is right. Or at least it's not going to let you complete the form by saying, yes, I already have 120 payments. If you get to the place in even if you've been paying for 20 years and you're like, I know I have 120 payments, the help tool is not always smart enough. So if you get to the point in the application where you try to say, yes, I have 120 payments and it won't let you move forward, just put no, and then it'll generate the application anyway. Like, this is a weird specific piece of advice for people on this very thing. So just FYI, this help tool we recommend. And then next.
Can I just mention one other thing? So for those of you who are consolidating and have to consolidate and then submit the PSLF application, the first communication that you get from MOHELA is going to say, you've made 0 eligible payments, and you're going to freak out and say, everything that Bridget and Andrea told us was wrong and they're terrible people. Here's what happens. Like, that's like an automatically generated thing. That's before they have considered all of the payments before consolidation. So your first letter that you get is going to be scary and wildly inaccurate. And then in the next couple of weeks to couple months, you will get a more appropriate, accurate reflection of your payment count that says, after reconsideration, after we've reviewed your, repayment history and consolidation, now you've reached the 120 payments or something to that effect. We just want to flag that because I can't tell you how many people have said, I thought this was going to happen, and it's just what happens. You get the first scary letter and then you'll get a more accurate reflection. So just be aware of that.
We call it the mean letter. People ask us about it a lot. you'll get a mean letter, and then afterwards it works out. So again, so this is the new screenshot. You go to loan repayment on FSA's website and then click on to consolidate. You log into your own account. It will let you consolidate your exact loans. Very often when you submit a public service loan forgiveness form, they're going to send you back a paper consolidation application if they're not currently showing your loans as eligible. Just ignore if you get a paper application and you've already done this step. So those are screenshots that just sort of give you a glimpse of how to go in. I know some people are actually doing it right now. And then on the next slide, it just shows you, I think, where you can click into that website to get to the loan forgiveness. Now they have a menu in the FSA website that says loan forgiveness. And then if you click into public service loan forgiveness, they've added that. They've actually also added a menu. So you can see it where it says apply for forgiveness. The second drop down is public service loan forgiveness. Student loan debt relief, that will be the location for the application on what President Biden announced this summer. So they've already started to rearrange their website to make space for that, which I think is great. Again, really excited for them to roll out this application tomorrow. I think is tomorrow October. Tomorrow is October. So we will be looking every day to find out when that thing is going to be released. And I think we might be towards the end. I think for purposes of time, I will maybe scream through these, Bridget, really, really quickly. We are, staff at Education Minnesota, but we also are very clear about the political context of this. None of this happened in a vacuum. And the reason we have a waiver is because we have a Department of Education that settled the lawsuit. And that Department of Education is coming from people who believe that this was a crisis. So elections have consequences. And we hope that everybody will remember that when they vote between now and Election Day for candidates who really believe in being responsive to this need, and also to the injustices of the system. So we encourage everybody to think through that. We also want to share on the next slide. Are we talking about the Student Borrower Bill of Rights? I don't remember. We in Minnesota have passed a Student Borrower Bill of Rights, and we think it's important for you as faculty and your students to know that the Department of Commerce now regulates loan servicers. We are the 15th state to do that. And this is a little moment where we get to toot our own horns. Like Bridget and I, as you can tell, like we have these other jobs and we do this. We are not lobbyists. It's actually kind of a bad idea to put me in front of the legislature, but our members said this was critical work. So we worked on this bill for 6 years, and now we have a Student Borrower Bill of Rights in Minnesota that regulates loan servicer behavior. And I think it's really important to know the power of unions when we come together to solve problems like this. It didn't happen in a vacuum. So please know that we definitely we would love to continue to partner with you on making changes that help all borrowers access not just loan forgiveness, but accurate information about their loans and their repayment history. It shouldn't be this hard to repay loans. So that is my soapbox moment for all of you. And then again, at the federal level, one of the things that we've talked about a lot in terms of federal level advocacy, we need more Pell Grants, we need more direct funding for higher education institutions and fewer barriers for people in accessing aid. And I think that is going to be a critical thing that we work on in future weeks, months, et cetera. So that was the slide that I just talked through, a slide that's not on the screen right now. Bridget, could you go to the end for me? I know you're answering questions here. Yep, federal level advocacy. I want to mention one thing that might be important for people who are going to be repaying your loans in future past the deadline for public service loan forgiveness waivers. They are indeed working very, very hard right now on new rules for income-driven repayment plans so that they could be potentially really affordable. The rules on that, the initial proposals are out, but we don't expect them until next summer. So for you or for your students, just know that they are making revisions to that process to income-driven repayments. And we expect that if we can get those rules passed, we will see actually affordable income-driven repayments for more people in the future. We know that has been a difficult barrier for many folks. And then lastly, I don't know, we end with this message, and this is very, very near and dear to my heart. I will let you all know, I started my union journey as a graduate union worker at the University of Rhode Island. And my first experience with unions was to join the AAUP as a graduate worker at URI and to bargain a contract that we didn't understand how to bargain with our faculty union. And I learned very, very quickly the power of our solidarity together when we come together around really difficult, thorny situations and say, we can do better together. And I want to make sure that that message is something we all experience together. And that's why I appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. And finally, we always give, it's super important for us to give attribution. We have a member of Education Minnesota who came to us and she said, you should be doing more on this. You should be doing more. And we're like, okay, we will. So we appreciate and offer recognition to Tracy Detloff and to our national unions and to our state level affiliates who work on this. We all do this together, and it's so important that we continue to make this environment for students and borrowers better. So with that, Jenna, is there any, before we close and answer questions, we'll leave resources up, but Jenna, is there anything you want to share? I have questions.
I want to express my thanks again for all of this. I've been watching the chat. We've been getting emails while this has been going on. People are incredibly appreciative. At the very beginning of the waiver process, Jonathan and I went out trying to find someone who was going to do something like this for our folks. And we talked to Min State. They didn't have anybody. They didn't even seem to understand what the program was. We weren't able to find anyone. And I was talking to Mark Grant with MSCF, and he's like, we have people. I talked to Denise, and we're just so grateful. And we absolutely, solidarity forever. And we are so much stronger when we stand together and we can get things like this done for all of us. So thanks again for all of this. And yeah, let's spend as much time answering questions as we can. So.
And I'm just going to make one other plug. Like, we know that there's like 26 up to 40 of you today. We don't want to get any emails on November 1st saying, what do I need to do to access this? So please tell folks that you work with, if you have friends and family who work in 501c3 nonprofits or in education at any other level. Like, our biggest concern, that is like a nightmare scenario for me. Like, I'm dreading November 1st. And November 8th, quite frankly, but November 1st because of this. So just please, like, share as widely and as much as possible.
And also I want to offer appreciation to our boss who joined us today and who made sure that we made this connection. Very honestly, like, this feels really personally and professionally important to Bridget and I, and we're happy to stick around as long as we can to answer questions. Jonathan, if you want to stop the recording, we're happy to answer questions as long as folks are here. But again,